Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to, Tuesday evening, June 4th, 2024. This is your host, Joshua Hervey. Some people know me as Sir Potato TV. I am here. I'm going to talk about my quarterback tiering. And I left you guys a little scrambled, maybe. If you guys were eggs, you were probably scrambled from my scramble brain last week. So we are gonna try to keep a clean, structured episode that is shorter and to the point, but hopefully good information. So for those of you who missed it last week, I will be focusing a lot of my content on uh, contract salary leagues, which is kind of a mixture between a keeper league, dynasty league. It's more than just that because there's actual value on players too, because each player has an attached salary to it and a length of contract to it. Um, so before I even continue the episode, you can either watch me on my Twitch channel, which is sirpotato_TV. You can watch me on my YouTube channel, which is Potato Sports and Gaming. And I will also be uploading this very own to Spotify once this episode is over, so you can also listen after the fact. And this episode, we actually will have a PowerPoint or a slideshow, however you want to call it, where I will be having, my tiers in every slide, and I'm going to be picking names out on those slides to talk about, why I have this person here versus another person here versus just a little bit of talking, not a whole lot, a couple minutes, pick out a couple names on each slide and talk about them, and case in point, and you might ask, well, how come you don't have actual rankings? Well, because I have actually found myself to be more successful when I put players into tiers together, and I am willing to pay a similar price range for that tier of player, where if I miss out on somebody, I'm okay with getting another person at that level. And also tiering, I actually responded to somebody on Twitter about a month ago talking about tiering, and I basically explained that if you draft using a top 300, you're probably going to be reaching for a player anyways, and you shouldn't be drafting using a top 300 because it's just, you get lost. You just get plain lost. You either want to have individual rankings of each group and kind of draft like best player available. It's just so much better when you group players into tiers of all positions and you are going through your draft. Yes, you might end up reaching on certain guys, but yes, you may also find value later on down the road, like, hey, I believe this guy is going to be better than this guy. He's still up in tier 3, and most of the other guys are like that are being picked right now are like tier 6. And so like you're going to find value. You might overvalue certain guys, but you want to make sure at the end of the day that for the most part you are trying to get players on value contracts. Market price is okay, but overpaying, we try to stay away from overpaying. You can overpay a little bit, but just keep in mind that as the years progress on players and like salary contract leagues, they go up. Very similar to the actual NFL, where the salaries go up as the contract continues. So that is part of the reason why I like tiering, and I just find it, when you tier everything, like I tier everything. I tier my rookies. This was the first year where I actually tiered my rookies because it made sense. But the last couple years, we started a new league last year. I put every player in a tier. I said if I don't leave with one of these quarterbacks at about this price, I might be a little disappointed, so on and so forth. And it's just helped me gauge where I want to spend my money when you are planning your attack. And a lot of contract salary leagues, at least on RSO, you have free agent auction. You have a veteran free agent auction draft as well after the rookie draft. So I tiered those players too. But one thing to keep in mind is that the value of those free agent veterans are going to be slightly skewed because of the amount of cap people might have remaining during the draft. So you do have to be weary about that as well. But overall, we're talking about tiers, quarterback tiers, and I personally like tiering because there's a range of outcomes in a specific tier. Why I put these players in those tiers, and they're similar, a little different. They might get there a little different. For instance, you might have your pocket passer and you might have a rusher, but the upside might be slightly better. Tiering players, you might have an injury-prone player versus like a safe player. A lot of people like to think that Kyler Murray is injury prone. Lamar Jackson might be injury prone, and versus like somebody like a Dak Prescott who's just been, he's kind of injury prone too, but he's been solid. There's other quarterbacks that have been solid too that are just kind of in like a weird group where it's like, I don't know how to judge these guys. I don't know if I want this guy or this guy. Well, that's why you put them in a tier. And you're like, okay, if this guy goes, then I'm going to take a different guy that I like in the same tier. And it allows you not to reach. It allows you not to overspend. It just helps. I think it helps in general. But, so let's get to the slideshow. So I'm going to do a slideshow. For those of you listening on a podcast, I will read the slides to you. And basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the slides. I'm going to pick a name. I'm going to talk about it. And I might go more in depth on some of like the top QB1s in Superflex leagues. Like some of the targeted QB1s in Superflex leagues. But as we get like down a little bit farther, I just might a sentence or two. This is why they're here. So, what I did is I put my quarterbacks in a tier. I sent it out to a few people. I got a little bit of feedback. So I'm going to use that feedback and I'm going to try to explain my why. And we will go to the slideshow right now. And QB tier 1. I have Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, and Patrick Mahomes. So I have one. The Patrick Mahomes is a tricky one. Because while he didn't do well last year, he has done well and been elite. And I actually just got done crunching numbers before the stream here on Patrick Mahomes when my buddy is all like, well, why is Patrick Mahomes in your tier 1? Because initially when I was going to tier, he was all like, you should put 5 or 6 names in a tier, and you should go on to your next tier. And I was trying to think about a way to put 5 names into a tier, because I originally only had Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts in tier 1, which for pure rushing upside, for pure... And Jalen Hurts isn't even, like, it could honestly just be Josh Allen in your tier 1, too. Because he has been elite for the last 2 to 3 years. And you can't deny the fact that his rushing ability alone is going to keep him at least tier 1, where he could easily be quarterback 1 every year. Some people think he's going to take a dip this year with no Stephon Diggs. We'll see what happens. But Jalen Hurts and Patrick Mahomes are the ones that people are like, I think Jalen Hurts is common, okay? Jalen Hurts is, I think, is commonly thrown into, like, the same group as Josh Allen. But there is a slight, like, a very minuscule, like, a half a point, almost a half a point per game less than Josh Allen. But this is basically my 350 fantasy points plus. And when I'm talking about 350 fantasy points plus, I'm talking in like 4 points passing touchdown, 1 point per 25 yards. I'm talking minus 2 points for interception. And then the rushing yards and the rushing touchdowns are 10 yards for rushing, 6 points for rushing touchdowns. Interceptions are minus 2. I already said that. So that's kind of, I'm basing it off of those kind of guidelines for scoring. Obviously, your scoring settings, you have to be careful as well, because passing touchdowns might be 6, whereas there's going to be a lot of guys that tend to throw 30 plus touchdowns almost every year. So you do want to keep that in mind, or it kind of does knock a little bit of the rushing upside off, where somebody that might throw 25 touchdowns, it does hinder it a little bit, but it's not like a whole lot. But so anyways, Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, and Patrick Mahomes is the one where when I was putting my tiers together, I opted to just throw him in this tier. And I know he had a very rough season last year. It could very well be rough again. But I honestly looked. I looked at his 6 seasons he played. I didn't count the 1 game his rookie season or 2 games his rookie season, because I just didn't really count it. So I went through. I found some interesting things about Patrick Mahomes. He threw for over 5,000 yards twice. He threw for 40 touchdowns plus, 40 plus touchdowns twice in those same seasons where he threw 5,000 yards. Okay? Those were his elite years. In his elite years, he averages about 25 fantasy points a game. That's about 425 fantasy points in a 17-game season. Now, obviously, you can't completely, like, guarantee the whole 17-game. Like, these stats are the whole year. You got to remember, like, we go into the playoffs. We aren't usually playing week 17, week 18. We try to stay away from that, avoid that. So, like, obviously, whatever you're in season, it just averages out to about 25 fantasy points a game when you are talking his elite, like he could be QB1 this year, like, with those stats, like 25 points a game. And then I went to his 2 seasons that were, like, his mediocre seasons for Patrick Mahomes. He averaged 22.7 fantasy points per game. That would have been about 386 fantasy points. And that's sort of the range I think he can bounce back to, and maybe even slightly less. And that's why he is in this tier. So this tier basically is my like 350 plus point tier, sort of, if you will. And um, his low end, his low end, his 2 seasons where he had his worst years, he actually didn't throw for 30. He actually didn't throw for 30 touchdowns. He threw for 27, 26 in both of those years, and he averaged 19.2 fantasy points per game, which is somewhere in the line of, it's still top 6-7 production at the quarterback position. The other fascinating thing that I noticed with Patrick Mahomes is every time he has thrown for under 30 touchdowns, he has bounced back. He has bounced back. And the last 4 seasons, he has also rushed for 300 plus yards. And all 6 of his seasons, okay, so last year he didn't have a rushing touchdown. But if you take all 6 of his full seasons, he averages 2 touchdowns a game rushing as well. So you got to add on those 52 extra fantasy points for that rushing upside. So that is why I justify Patrick Mahomes in tier 1. Because, yes, the scale, the spectrum is so... It's 6-point difference. It's almost a 6-point difference per fantasy, which is huge. Huge in fantasy football. But I feel like that range to me isn't going to hurt you one bit. If you want to take Patrick Mahomes as the 3rd quarterback off the board, if you want to pay him top price, and it was actually quite funny. Earlier this offseason, I'm like, I don't think Patrick Mahomes is a top 5 QB in fantasy. And then I went and I dove into Patrick Mahomes, and I'm like, nope, I can't keep him outside of my top 5. So here he is in my tier 1, and this is my tier 1. Let's move on to the next slide, tier 2. Lamar Jackson, Kyler Murray, Dak Prescott, CJ Stroud, Joe Burrow. So these guys all average somewhere around the 18, 19 fantasy points, like Patrick Mahomes' low end. Low end fantasy points per game. And the biggest question mark with a couple of these guys is their injury history. So Kyler Murray, people say he was injury prone, when actually on Kyler Murray's healthy games, he's actually pretty elite. He averages, I did the math, 21 fantasy points a game, where if he does stay healthy the whole season, he could hit that threshold of 350 plus fantasy points. And people, the biggest argument I got with Kyler Murray being in tier 2 is, where is Brock Purdy? So before I get to this debate, I really don't have much to say on these other guys. I'm kind of bouncing around here. But before I get to the Kyler Murray, Brock Purdy debate, which it's going to come here in a minute, Dak Prescott has been pretty elite as well. I think he has finished at QB2 in fantasy football before, and that's why he is in my tier 2. I don't think he has the enough rushing upside to justify him in tier 1, though. And it's not that I hate Dak Prescott, but everybody, for some reason, undervalues Dak Prescott every year in fantasy football. And people forget that he is literally a star for your fantasy football team. And CJ Stroud is young. He's going into his sophomore year. Joe Burrow is another weird ranking for me, I feel like. See, personally, I'm not a huge truther in Joe Burrow. I feel like he is a guy I would rather have in best ball, as in instead of like a contract league where you have to depend on him every week. And so, because he's injured, and I feel like a lot of his production comes in a few games, and he's very inconsistent. Um, yeah. But we're going to go to tier 3. I'm going to show you my tier 3 rankings, and then we'll hop back to tier 2 because I want to have a little discussion between Kyler Murray and Brock Purdy. So I have Brock Purdy in tier 3, Caleb Williams, Jordan Love, Kirk Cousins, Justin Herbert. And these guys all are just slightly a notch below the guys in tier 2, where they're, high 17 point per game to like low 17 points per game. And I am not a Brock Purdy fan. All right? People get enamored with guys, and they have very strong opinions about those guys, and then they also have strong opinions negatively about other guys that they are not high on. So everybody has a value to every player. It just depends on how you feel. So when I went and did my rankings, I legitimately looked at stats. I tried to look and, kind of formulate what could happen. I know, like, the whole stat thing, fantasy points per game thing, is, it's probably not, like, a formidable, like, gone conclusion, like, hey, this is what's going to happen. Because it's fantasy football. Anything can happen. Anything can happen. I just told you Patrick Mahomes has rushed for 300 yards a year in the last 4 years and an average of 2 touchdowns. If he rushes for 150 yards this year and 0 touchdowns, you guys are going to slap me in the face and be like, where's Patrick Mahomes' rushing upside? Like, I can't guarantee it, but the tendency is there to where he should rush for 300 yards and about 2 touchdowns. Okay? The tendency is there. That's all I gotta say. Brock Purdy has a ton of weapons. Mind you not, Brandon Ayuk might be gone. He's holding out. We have no clue. George Kittle gets injured. Injury bug. Christian McCaffrey just re-signed a contract extension. Deebo Samuel seems like the guy that's staying. He was more healthy a little bit last year, and he's been kind of in and out of the lineup. And people actually want to formulate this conclusion that the 49ers, yes, their average yards per play go down, but statistically, Brock Purdy is fine in those games. And I know this might seem weird to you, but Brock Purdy actually, his points per game without Deebo actually goes up because he has to do a little bit more. Whether he scrambles more, finds different receivers, finds Christian McCaffrey, who is just as talented. Like, people want to formulate this opinion that Brock Purdy is not good when Deebo, it's false. Last year that was the case. This year was totally different. So, Brock Purdy versus Kyler Murray. Why is Brock Purdy is on the cusp, by the way, of tier 2, tier 3. And it's not that I don't like Brock Purdy. I just don't think Brock Purdy can actually elevate his weapons. I think his weapons elevate him in the Shanahan system. And that is why he is in this tier. Because I don't know the upside of Brock Purdy. And this could come back to bite me 100%. It could be the whole Tom Brady thing 2.0, where what's Tom Brady going to do without Bill Belichick? And he goes out and wins another Super Bowl with another team. Like, it could totally freaking happen down the road. But, you know what? I'm not a fan of Brock Purdy. I like the weapons around Brock Purdy. I'm not hating on Brock Purdy. Every quarterback has a value. And when we're talking about my tiers here, we're talking about contracts, values. Everybody's got a value. I'm paying top dollar for tier 1. Tier 2 should be slightly below that. Tier 3, we're getting into the range here where it should be lower. Some people are going to overpay for some of these guys. For instance, Caleb Williams is a rookie. A lot of times in startup drafts, rookies get overpriced. And when I mean overpriced, last year in our 14-team Superflex League, Anthony Richardson, who you haven't seen yet in this tier, you're probably wondering why he's not in this tier. I'm not a big Anthony Richardson guy. I'm just going to be 100% honest with you. His college production was not that good. Last year, he averaged 144 yards passing per game. He did rush for 4 touchdowns in the 4 games that he played. But rushing for 1 touchdown a game is not sustainable at the NFL level. I personally believe that I'm going to let you guys all spend your money on Anthony Richardson, and I'll go out and I'll buy Caleb Williams. I'll go out, I'll buy Jordan Love. I'll go out, I'll buy Kirk Cousins, who is coming off of an injury, by the way, who some people question why I have him in my tier 3, coming off of an Achilles. Some people also ask me, why is Kirk Cousins up here in tier 3 and not Tua? Whew, good questions. You know what, guys? Kirk Cousins has statistically thrown for more touchdowns per season than Tua has so far. Tua has concussion injury history where 1 concussion could potentially take him out of the NFL. It's a huge risk. Not only on top of that, but what is going to happen to Tua when Tyreek loses his speed? Everybody likes Jalen Waddle. But when Tyreek Hill loses his speed, what happens to Tua? He crumbles under pressure more than Kirk Cousins does. Listen, I like Tua. Don't get me wrong. But I don't think Tua is better than Kirk Cousins. He's younger than Kirk Cousins. He's probably got more upside than Kirk Cousins. And he can obviously get better than Kirk Cousins. Those are all justifiable answers. But at this point in my career, I'm taking a little bit of stability. And yes, Kirk Cousins switched teams. He also switched teams to Minnesota from Washington, which was a crap hole of a team. He came to Minnesota and performed way better than he ever did in Washington. And he has been performing way better ever since. And he's not even changing systems. See, Kirk Cousins is a systems quarterback. He's staying in the same system. Yes, he's got new wide receiver. He's got a new tight end. He's got Bijan Robinson. They might run the ball more. Yes, I've heard all of it. I've heard all of it. But you want to know what else? Do you know how many times Kirk Cousins dumped the ball off to Dalvin Cook a few years ago and Dalvin Cook just took it to the house? Bijan Robinson could do that too. Like, he is that talented. What's the difference? What's the difference? I'm buying the Kirk Cousins. If you wanna let Kirk Cousins fall, let him fall, let him fall, let his value go down. I'll take him on my team for a year or two. I'm not worried about Michael Penix starting in a year or two, unless something happens with his Achilles that he just tore, where he doesn't come back fully healthy. Then there might be some issues. Okay, so there is a little bit of injury concern coming back, but personally, I can't do it. Like, I'm okay with taking the risk of Kirk Cousins for the next year or two at a good price. So let him fall. Let's go to tier 4. I have Jaden Daniels, Anthony Richardson, Jared Goff, Matthew Stafford, Aaron Rodgers, Tua Tagovailoa, and Trevor Lawrence here. I originally did not have Aaron Rodgers in this tier. I originally had Geno Smith in this tier, which doesn't mean he shouldn't be here, but Geno Smith could be on his way out the door. Aaron Rodgers is probably on his close to his final year, and I tried to justify not having Aaron Rodgers in this tier, realizing that, like, you know what, when he does play, he is pretty good. He does have a pretty good Jets offense. As long as he is healthy and stays healthy. Like, we didn't see it last year. He got hurt on the 4th play of the season, and everybody was so excited to watch Aaron Rodgers lead the Jets to a Super Bowl. And look what we got. We got misery. It was just a bunch of misery in New York. Both teams in New York. Miserable. And here's my debate with Anthony Richardson. So I put Jaden Daniels and Anthony Richardson in tier 4. Just because I have them in tier 4, below Justin Herbert, below Kirk Cousins, below some of those guys, it doesn't mean they can't be better. This is just how I see them. Okay? Anthony Richardson played 4 games. He needs to learn how to run and take a hit and stay healthy before I can actually justify putting him in a tier with players that are getting me 17 fantasy points a game. Yes, what about his rushing upside? Anthony Richardson, can I actually be truthful with you? Caleb Williams rushed for more touchdowns than Anthony Richardson ever did in a season in college. Yeah. Facts. Did you also know that Anthony Richardson was one of the best athletes at the Combine last year? Do you want to know how many athletic freaks have come into the NFL and failed? A lot. I feel like that's who this guy is. He's an athletic freak, and I feel like this is very similar to Justin Fields. To me, in my opinion, the rushing upside to Justin Fields was so great. Although I do think Justin Fields has a better arm. Although that's questionable as well. Because he didn't run a whole lot last year. That's why he wasn't valuable. We aren't talking about Justin Fields. Screw it. Anthony Richardson's arm is awful. Let's just be honest. It is not great. So, you have Anthony Richardson, and then we have Jaden Daniels with Anthony Richardson. I drafted Jaden Daniels in my 12-team Superflex League at pick 1-3. And I don't know if I can justify putting Jaden Daniels in my top 10 QBs because of his size profile. His only 1 year of good production in college kind of scares me. But as long as he has rushing upside as my third QB where I don't have to plug him in week 1, I'm totally okay with that. And that goes for all rookies. When you're drafting rookies in your rookie drafts, when you're drafting rookies in your auction drafts, in your startups, if you have to, try not to start these guys week 1. Because even this year, there were 6 quarterbacks taken and 12 picks. We already know Michael Penix is not starting over Kirk Cousins, unless Kirk Cousins is not back from injury. I think everybody thinks Sam Darnold is going to be starting week 1, but we don't know how long over J.J. McCarthy. I think the conception is that Drake May is going to be sitting behind Jacoby Brissett. Who knows? I don't think anybody knows. Bo Nix, is he winning out the starting job in Denver? And then, are they going to start Zach Wilson? Are they going to start Jared Stidham? Like, I don't know that situation, but Bo Nix could be the starter. I mean, we already know Caleb is starting. Like, Caleb is the only rookie this year that I would be comfortable starting as like a QB2 if I had to. And I know I have him higher than QB2 in my rankings. But Caleb Williams is really the only guy that I'm comfortable with starting as a rookie. So there's some aging guys in here. There's Tua Tagovailoa. Jared Goff has been super consistent the last 2 years. The Lions have just added so many weapons. A lot of people wanted them to add another receiver. That didn't really happen. So let's move on to Tier 4 here. Geno Smith, Will Levis, Derek Carr, Bryce Young, Baker, Deshaun. I feel like a lot of these guys, like Will Levis, Bryce Young, I think we all think they can take a year 2 leap. So that's kind of like the plan, and maybe they can jump into Tier 4 next year, whereas maybe Aaron Rodgers might retire after the next year. Maybe we see a decline in Kirk Cousins' production, because it could happen. He's getting into his upper 30s. He's coming off of an Achilles injury. I mean, you never know what's going to happen. You really don't. Geno Smith could be out the door next year. They picked up Sam Howell. This is Geno Smith's final year of his contract. Derek Carr could easily, like, he's been steady. Like, people want to hate on Derek Carr. I went and actually looked at his, like, fantasy points for, like, the last, like, 3 or 4 years. He's been right around 220 to 270 fantasy points, which is, it's not great. Let me just be honest. It's not great. But it's not as bad as a lot of the people make it seem to be. And everybody, like I said, wants Will Levis and Bryce Young to take a step forward. Both of those teams, Tennessee and Carolina, have put pieces around on the offense to see what they have year 2 in these guys. And Baker Mayfield lost his offensive coordinator. He could be, some people like Baker Mayfield over Kirk Cousins, which I think is super crazy. But I'm not naming names. I'm not going to call people out. Deshaun Watson, listen, we haven't seen any of the good Deshaun Watson in a very long time, since before his off-the-field issues. Not to mention he has been injury-prone since he's been back. So maybe missing massages is not helping him out. Tier 6. Tier 6 originally was about 12 names. And then I went through and I'm all like, okay, if these guys are starting or these guys are rookies, I'm putting them in tier 6 because A, they have upside, and B, there's some value there. J.J. McCarthy, Drake May, Bo Nix, Daniel Jones, Russell Wilson, Gardner Minshew. These are all like QB situations that I really don't want to be a part of. And I did buy Danny Dimes. I did buy Daniel Jones in my 14-team Superflex League. I'm not a big Daniel Jones. I thought that contract the Giants gave Daniel Jones was ridiculous. And he's coming off of an ACL. He's a running quarterback. He can never stay healthy. They have a really, like, their offensive line is not that good. Malik Neighbors is dogging him. Like does not like it. Like, who knows what's going to happen, but from the Giants' standpoint, they have to play Daniel Jones. Like, they think, like, if they don't play Daniel Jones with what they're paying him this year, it's going to be a total nightmare. It's just a total nightmare already. Like, Daboll is probably getting fired. Like, this coaching staff, especially if they could get fired mid-season. So, this could be just disastrous for the Giants in general. Russell Wilson on the Steelers. I really don't know what to think about Russell Wilson. Because I think he was okay. But I feel like a lot of his fantasy points came in, like, garbage time, similar to what Blake Bortles was doing a couple years ago. I think a lot of I don't think Denver was a good team either last year, and I just don't think he meshed into that Sean Payton offense. Whereas, like, Russell Wilson, when he is best, or when he was his best, he was always extended plays with his feet outside the pocket and looking downfield to make, like, a deep, accurate throw with, like, that's what he tried to do, and that's not what Sean Payton does. And then Gardner Minshew is in here. I believe Gardner Minshew is going to start for the Raiders. I'm not sure what's going to happen to Aiden O'Connell. But, so, like, everybody in this, they're rookies. They could start by the end of the year, or they could lose their job by the end of the year. That's why this tier is here, because I have no clue what's going to happen. And then when we get to tier 7, it's a bunch of backups or short-term starters. Sam Darnold could be a short-term starter. Drew Lock might be a short-term starter, or maybe even a long-term. Like, Drew Lock is very interesting to me. Everything you know about the Giants, if he sucks or if he's not healthy, they could literally just throw in Drew Lock, try to make Malik Neighbors happy, and it still might be a bad product in the New York Giants. Don't get me wrong, because I'm not a super Drew Lock guy. Jacoby Brissett is probably going to start. And then the other guys are just, like, backups. Like, there's a lot of buzz about Zach Wilson in the Broncos camp. There's Jameis Winston is backing up Deshaun Watson, who I just talked about in Tier 6. When Deshaun Watson can't stay healthy, Joe Flacco is sitting behind Anthony Richardson, where we don't know if Anthony Richardson is going to be better, if he's going to get hurt, is he going to improve his way of running? Like, slide a little bit more, try to, like, lessen the blows as he's getting tackled. So those are my tier. That's my tier 7. That's all my quarterbacks right there, and some, because obviously, like, the bottom 6 teams have, like, a QB battle, and when you have a QB battle, you're probably not good. So that being said, those are my QB tiers. Any questions? Please feel free to reach out to me. You can email me. I got a Discord channel if you're watching on YouTube. If you're listening on Spotify, there should be a Discord link. If you're on my Twitch already, I'm going to ! Show here. And that is the Discord to my pod, my fantasy football stuff. I don't have a link. I don't have commands in YouTube. I'm dumb. But it is in the description. So just go into my bio. You can see it. So any questions, reach out to me in Discord. Join my Discord channel. Feel free, reach out to me on Twitter, Sir Potato at Sir Potato TV. Thank you so much for listening. And before I close out, guys, I just want to say I'm very passionate about fantasy football, and I personally think that I'm trying to work my hardest to have some sort of structure moving forward. And I hope today was a little better, a little bit more guiding, not all over the place. Yeah, I jumped names here and there. I get a little wound up sometimes and excited when I start reading names off, and then I just something flickers in my head where I have to say another name. So please, 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 I apologize. We're gonna work. We're gonna get better. We're gonna time crunch this thing. I apologize for any kind of scrambleness. That's not my intention. So thank you guys very much for giving me your time. Thank you very much for listening. If you did listen through the whole thing, if you were bored by any shot, I hope you weren't bored. If you have questions about quarterbacks, tiers, values on these tiers, it's all dependent on your league. And you have to, it all comes down to understanding your settings. If you're in a league that you've been in for a while, understanding how your league mates attack drafts, how, if you're in a fresh league and you've never done a contract sale league and you've never really done an auction league before, then this could be very, very, very interesting. And at some point, I would like to get a group of people together to do an auction draft with salary, a contract salary league startup, and we can kind of, maybe use that as like a focal point to the show and kind of help go through teams and kind of analyze it and use it for a show as kind of a template, because I feel like that is the best way to learn. Me telling you about my leagues and what I'm in and who I have on my team, that's not the whole picture. And maybe before the season starts, I will go through my teams. Maybe I will discuss some strategies, how I go about attacking my free agent veteran drafts, and how I see it, and money and analyzing, and maybe that's good. Maybe that could be 2 episodes right there. So thank you guys so much for listening. Once again, my plan, in 2 weeks, we'll be back. We're gonna talk a little bit about running backs, and we're gonna put my running backs in tiers, just like we did with this. I'll put out my running back rankings. I'll send them out to a few people like I did with my quarterbacks. I'll try to get some feedback, so that way when I come back for next episode, I can do the same thing. That being said, thank you. Have a good night. Have a great Tuesday. This will be uploaded to Spotify